Bore da pawb. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to my wild Welsh garden, if this is your first visit here. And of course, welcome back if you've been before or if you're one of my regular viewers. Well, it's September now, so it's on the verge of autumn, and it's almost a year since I've been wilding my garden. So this is the channel where I'm sharing my journey from conventional gardener to wild gardener. This is a channel where I'm wilding my garden to make it as good for wildlife as I possibly can. Not just to visit, but actually to come and make a home here. And as I say, it's autumn. And I've always thought that autumn was a good time for kind of taking stock, really, for assessing the garden and deciding what I liked about it, what maybe worked, what I didn't like about it, maybe what didn't work, and maybe what I wish I'd done differently. And as it's a year since I started this channel and started wilding my garden, I think this is a really good time to reflect on what I've done and what I think about it now. So as I've just been sitting in the summer house, I thought I'd started with the lawn. Well, those of you who've been following me regularly will know that I've ummed and ahed about this wretched lawn really all summer. But I think I'm quite happy now with the way I'm managing it, which is to mow a path, well, quite a large path up the middle, and to have the bird bath out in the open so that the birds feel safe to come and bathe in it. And then to allow the edges just to grow long. So I have some very messy edges. I haven't cut these at all summer, and this is what happens. And the reason for leaving part of the lawn to grow long like this is that it's a really good habitat for invertebrates, for insects, and they're at the bottom of the food chain. So if you have lots of invertebrates, then you can have the birds and the mammals and the reptiles and the amphibians as well. And the other reason to allow the lawn to grow long is to allow any wild flowers that are in it to flower. Of course, most of them have gone over now. But there's red clover still flowering. There's dandelion and the very tiny willow herb. There's greater bird's foot trefoil. There's fox and cubs. And the very last of the self-heal. But I also have a lot of grass. And the problem with grass is it does tend to take over and crowd out the wildflowers. So what I've got is I've collected some yellow rattle seeds. And this is a plant which is a native of the UK and it's semi-parasitic on grass. And what it does is it weakens the grass. So the grass doesn't disappear, it's just less vigorous, and so it gives the wildflowers a chance. Well, I've tried sowing yellow rattle before, and the thing is, it doesn't work if you're going to cut your lawn at all, because it's an annual and it needs to set seed. So it may well get started in your lawn, but of course, as soon as you cut it, then it defeats the object because it can't set seed and it can't establish itself. But it will work if I sow it around the edges. In this area that I haven't cut at all, yellow rattle would do very well. It would reduce the vigour of the grass, particularly this one, which is Yorkshire fog, which has these quite wide leaves and forms quite a dense mat, really, which will prevent further wildflowers from germinating and even maybe crowding out the wildflowers that I've got. And September is the time for sowing yellow rattle. You have to sow it fresh and give it a winter to be cold. It has to have a period of cold, and then it will germinate next spring. So very soon I'm going to cut these edges. I think in future years I won't. I'm going to leave them over the winter. But this year, because I want to get yellow rattle established, I'm going to cut these and sow yellow rattle seed. So that's going to be in a future video over the next week or so. But I'm very happy with my grassy areas. This one is around the new pond. This used to be just flower beds. And I sowed it with meadow grass originally last October, but those little seedlings, they did come up, but they didn't survive the winter. So I sowed it again this spring, and I got this lovely patch of long grass, and this I am going to leave. I'm not going to cut this at all. This is just going to stay as long grass and as a habitat for all manner of creatures, invertebrates, but also vertebrates. I also sowed around the polytunnel with meadow grass. This time last year, this was just an access path covered in weed suppressant membrane and wood chip, and now it's a lovely new habitat for all kinds of different creatures. And on this side of the polytunnel too. I wanted a path to go to my new compost bins, and because I've been walking to them, that's just what I have. A nice path with wilderness on both sides. One thing I'm not so happy about is allowing this bramble to grow here. So I am going to come and dig out as much as I can and cut it back. I'm sure I've said that before, but I am going to. One thing I'm not happy about are my vegetable patches. It's been a very difficult year for growing vegetables, I know that. I do watch gardening channels of people who grow vegetables, and everybody's saying the same really. So that's why I haven't got any sweet corn, that's why I haven't got any courgettes, and that's why the slugs have just had a field day on all my brassicas and my runner beans. But this time last year, I had a net over the brassicas. Well, the net wouldn't have protected them from the slugs. In fact, that would have made them worse, probably because the birds can't get in to catch the slugs. But it did keep the butterflies off. And so because the butterflies have had access to the brassicas, yeah, I've had a brassica massacre. Yes, this is my perennial kale, which has just been eaten to blazes. Poor thing. And my broccoli, which of course is flowering at the wrong time. It's flowering now instead of next spring. And then the sprouts down there, which are just shredded. Yeah, so at the moment I'm wondering really whether it's possible to grow vegetables in a wild garden. I mean, I know some people do, but I'm at a loss as to know how. I know the theory is to encourage natural predators, but the birds don't eat the caterpillars of the large white because I don't know whether they're poisonous or they just don't taste very nice, but they certainly warn the birds off with their colours. I know there's a parasitic wasp that lays its eggs in these caterpillars, and its larvae do horrible things to them. But all my large white caterpillars seem really healthy. But either way, relying on natural predators clearly isn't working. Another thing that's suggested is to grow companion plants which the butterflies can lay their eggs on. One of them is a nasturtium. And look at this wretched nasturtium, it's fabulous, not a caterpillar in sight. And then next door is my broccoli, which is again just shredded. And then brassica plants are supposed to be able to recover from attacks by caterpillars. Well, I remain to be convinced that this sprout plant is going to recover. The runner beans and climbing beans just struggled to get away from the slugs this year. A few of them did, and they've produced a few beans, but certainly not very many. So yes, I think my vegetable patches are doing a very good job of feeding the slug and white butterfly populations around here, and a really bad job of feeding me. And the same goes for my little orchard here. I'm not really happy about this. I've got 2 apple trees and a pear tree. Pear tree hasn't produced a pear, but this year I've had my first apples, so that's good. But there are also currant bushes and gooseberry bushes here, and they haven't really produced any harvest at all. So they're obviously not doing well. They're obviously not happy here. And there are strawberries in here and all sorts of different herbs. Yes, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'm going to give it some thought. One of the things that I said I was going to do this time last year was to have more native plants, more wildflowers. And I tried to do that, and it's been a mixed success. This is wild marjoram, but I've always had this. It's always self-seeded itself. I think we brought it with us from Wigan, and it's always done very well and very good for pollinators. But the wild carrot, not so much. This is one of 2 survivors from, I can't remember, over a dozen. And yeah, the slugs just loved them and ate them all. But I've got some seeds forming, so I'm not going to give up. I'm going to try again next year. This plant's done very well as well. This is sneezewort. It's pretty much over now, but it has these lovely starry white flowers. And this was 5 plug plants that I planted in the spring. And yeah, the slugs haven't eaten it, and the pollinators love it. So yeah, I think I'm going to try and collect seed from this and grow some more. In fact, there's a few native plants in this area. That's hemp agrimony, which I planted as very small plants this spring, and that's done okay. The pollinators love it and the slugs don't love it, so that's good. And I've planted up several pots of bird's foot trefoil. This is just one of them, and they've really loved it in the pots. The difference, of course, with the normal pots you have with bedding is you don't have the long flowering period and the sort of great pop of colour. But that's not what I want anymore. I want food for wildlife. So yeah, so that's worked, I think. And then this is the purple toad flax, which is still flowering. This is a native plant, and it seems to like it here, and the bees love it and the slugs don't, so that's been another success. I planted some field scabious plug plants here too, and I thought they died the death, but they're very late flowering, so they're coming out now. And I think I've got at least 2, so that's good. I'll try those again. And there's the other surviving wild carrot. I also planted cow parsley down here, of which there is no sign whatsoever. So I think the slugs must have eaten those. This is what's left of the evening primrose. I've always had them, but I've never allowed them to grow and flower before. And it's just been lovely, very bright yellow. I've had several of them in the garden, and slugs don't like them either, so they've done very well. There's one native plant that I think likes it rather too much here, and that's the native aquilegia, the columbine and granny's bonnet. And it was lovely in the spring. It was so colourful and gorgeous and all covered in bees. And I left about half of them to form seed heads because I thought that they would be good habitat for creatures. And I'm sure that They are, but there's just rather too many seeds, and I have rather too many seedlings, and they do sort of grow up and produce a lot of foliage, and I think shade out other plants. So I think next year I shall do some serious weeding out of the new plants and cutting back and digging out of the old plants as well. This damselfly has spent a lot of time just sunning itself on this stone frog at the edge of the pond. So I don't know whether it's emerged from this pond, whether it's lived in there as a larvae, whether it's a new visitor looking for either somewhere to lay its eggs or a mate. Either way, it's very welcome. So I've learnt a lot from the last year, but there's a lot more to learn, I'm sure. The garden is still a work in progress, but isn't that the same with all gardens? That's why it's called gardening and never gardened, because a garden is never finished. Anyway, thank you for joining me in my wild Welsh garden, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Hwyl fawr!